Good morning, everyone. Everyone hear me okay at the back? Wave, yes, good morning, everyone. Hi, my name's Helen Beal. I work at Ranger 4. Ranger 4 is a specialist DevOps consultancy. We help people evolve using DevOps principles. It's a little bit faded out on the screen here. Sorry about that, it looks better on mine. My Twitter handle is @HelenRanger4 if you want to follow me on there. And today I'm going to be talking to you about DevOps-driven development and delivery. This is kind of a new topic for me. It's a bit similar to last year. I spent a lot of time talking about DevOps and all the continuouses, having noticed that continuous was a word that pops up very regularly around the DevOps world. I did a survey sort of in January 2016 about how continuous is your DevOps and started to take the mickey out of the word a little bit, frankly, because I found it just popping up everywhere and it got a bit ridiculous. And this is kind of similar. I make that analogy because I kind of started noticing this, that people were talking about TDD. We talk about TDD a lot as a kind of high level of maturity around the way that we manage, capture and execute around ideas and requirements. Saw lots of people talking about BDD, very closely related. There's a great video on YouTube, don't know if you've seen it, about a guy that puts up a shelf and he uses TDD and BDD to put up the shelf. I'll try and remember to put a link into that later. Then I started seeing things like hypothesis-driven development. Anyone come across this one before? No, so some blank looks around the room. We're going to talk more about experimentation and where it fits into DevOps and what a hypothesis is shortly. Then value-driven development kept on popping up. There's all these different driven development ones. The value-driven development one I found really interesting because we have a saying in DevOps that we should never let a known defect pass downstream. Anybody heard that saying? Little nod over there. So it's kind of a principle that we talk to a lot of customers with when they're experiencing quality problems in particular. It happens ever such a lot. We run a DevOps Foundation course. One of our customers is a company called Mantis based in Switzerland. I was doing a course with them, and in the first break we just covered never let a known defect pass downstream. Went into the break, all the mobiles went off, there was an outage, we got called up to the war room and a known defect had been passed downstream, and Agron, the DevOps team leader, was quite furious about this, and it took out their whole German operations for that entire morning. I brought up this subject of never letting a known defect pass downstream with another customer of ours, an insurance customer based on the south coast of England, when we were presenting results from an assessment that we'd done with them, and had the CIO in the room, and he kind of stopped us and he said, but if we can't let known defects pass downstream and go into live, then that's not value-driven development. And I said, in what way is that not value-driven development? He said, well, we need to have a conversation with the business that says, we haven't quite done this, or it's not quite right, but you think it's really important and we're going to release it anyway. And I said, well, that's not quite value-driven development, actually. That is just having business priorities that are saying that you're going to let defects go through. Value-driven development is when we're prioritising things based on the value that the organisation has estimated they're going to be. So it got me thinking about, if we took all of these things that we're saying are kind of DevOpsy and kind of said, what does DevOps-driven development look like? And then I thought, well, we can't just have DevOps-driven development because DevOps is DevOps, so we're talking about delivery as well. So it got me thinking about how to kind of package this stuff into something that we'll come back to what we might call this later on. So I've asked you a few questions already. I just want to get a few in the room. Who's got DevOps in their job title? Anyone work in a DevOps team? Anyone thinks their organisation they work for is over 50% in terms of maturity around DevOps? I know that's quite a nebulous term, but we're fairly newish around most of the room, I think, to the DevOps world. So let's think a little bit then about what DevOps is. So many of you probably think, right, DevOps, that's the dev team and the ops team working better together. Where DevOps started with Patrick Dubois was thinking about Agile system administration, so recognition that developers were working in an Agile manner and the ops guys weren't keeping up. And we saw all sorts of conflicts at that point. They kind of manifested themselves in ways like developers getting really annoyed that ops took ages, like weeks, to provide environments, ops getting really annoyed with development because development were asking for admin access to production systems. Lots of kind of conflict between those particular teams. But as the years have gone by, and that was 10 years ago actually that Patrick Dubois and Andrew Schaefer got together, and Patrick, they started an Agile System Administrators Google group, and then Patrick started DevOps Days around 7 years ago now. The years have gone by, and the people that, so people like Patrick, the progenitors of DevOps, kind of refused to write a manifesto or a bunch of books, so it's like a bit unlike Agile and unlike ITIL in that respect. It's been allowed to develop and evolve in its own way. And it's become quite a lot more than just Dev and Ops working together. So I like to use this statement quite a lot, which is from Mark Schwartz's book. So Mark was the CIO at the US Customs Group, and he's now working at Amazon. The Art of Business Value is this book. He's got another one coming out shortly. I think it's called Getting a Seat at the Table, something like that. It's published by the IT Revolution Press. So some of you, we'll do your hands up again, who's familiar with the Phoenix Project? Heard of it? Read it? So it's kind of like a hack to DevOps. If you want to know what DevOps is about, you can read a book called The Phoenix Project. It's a novel, so it's a really nice, easy read. It's very character-driven, it's very narrative-driven. We actually also have a business simulation. I ran one yesterday at a consulting group based on the game, where we live the events of the game and we choose to do things like whether to deploy faster deployment tools, whether to do cross-skilling and sharing of skills, whether to use Kanban boards and visual collaboration, there's various different things that happen in that book. And I mentioned the Phoenix Project because it's also published by IT Revolution Press, which is very closely connected to Gene Kim, who's one of the authors of the Phoenix Project and also the DevOps Handbook that we're going to have a look at in a bit more detail later on. So what Mark says about DevOps is that DevOps, in a sense, is about setting up a value delivery factory, a streamlined, waste-free pipeline through which value can be delivered to the business with predictably fast cycle time. Not sure how many of you were in the last session with Nikhil. A few of you, so you'll have heard him start to talk about value. We've already talked or touched on value-driven development. This is a big thing in DevOps, this focus on value and delivering outcomes to the customer, whether they're internal or external. Also at the core of that is this concept around value streams, and I haven't got the images here, but if you read the DevOps Handbook, which came out in October 2016, written by Gene Kim, who I've already mentioned as one of the authors of the Phoenix Project, Jez Humble, who was one of the authors of the Continuous Delivery book that the previous presenter put up as some follow-on reading, John Willis, who came up with the CAMS acronym for DevOps that we may discuss in a bit, and of course Patrick Dubois, the godfather of all of this. There's two chapters on value streams. Value streams is very much a lean thing. It's very, very useful for visual collaboration, getting a bunch of people in a room that hardly ever get together in a room and thinking about how these processes hang together in the way that you deliver a product or a service. Essentially, if we think of the value stream as starting from somebody having an idea and delivering the realization or the outcome of that idea in real business terms, we're essentially in DevOps just trying to shrink that spring. So we're trying to take waste out of the process. We're trying to remove errors, manual waste, trying to automate where we can, and it makes sense where we're doing boring, repeatable, error-prone tasks. We're trying to make the teams work much closer together so we don't have such lengthy handoffs as we're waiting for environments to be provisioned or somebody to do a security test, whatever it is. We're trying to make that a lot quicker. So I want to talk about the DevOps loop and the 3 ways as well. So the DevOps loop, again, sorry, it's not displaying very particularly well on this screen. But really what we're saying here is traditionally when we've described an SDLC or a software development lifecycle, we've looked very much kind of linear. We start here and we do some design and we go through these stages and then it goes into operation at the end. What we're saying here is that it's a continuous release lifecycle. This is how we should think about it. We're going round and round the loop, getting feedback, doing it as fast as we can over and over. And importantly, we're thinking about what happens beyond deployment as well. So we're thinking about how to measure the value and get the feedback and change the way that we're making decisions on the basis of that. Over here, we have the 3 ways. The 3 ways underpin the Phoenix Project and what we do in DevOps. So the first way is all about the flow from left to right, like we just described. The second way, all about feedback loops. Getting frequent, so shortened and amplified feedback loops allows us to make changes more quickly. So lots of people kind of say, I don't really understand the difference between waterfall or agile, I don't really understand the point. And I say it's quite simple. If you've got 6 months, you've got 100 features. With waterfall, you're delivering 100 features at the end of 6 months. With agile, every 2 weeks, we're going to deliver 8. So you've got shorter feedback loops. We know that we're getting them right because we're getting them checked regularly. And we should be faster. So actually, at the end of 6 months, we should be able to deliver 120 or 140 features. So this is about getting those feedback loops in. The third way is about experimentation and learning. I said we were going to talk more about experimentation. This is a tough one for a lot of people. Lots of the organisations we work with, some of them are like 250 years old and have got tens of thousands of people working in the IT department. And they've got a lot of technical debt. They've got a lot of legacy systems. It's very monolithic. It's quite painful. There's lots of dependencies in systems and between systems, and life is quite tough. And they tend to be firefighting. That's their number one job, is firefighting. Number two job, trying to get some change through. Number three job could be experimentation learning, but they never get that time. I hear it over and over again. We can't find the time to save time. So this is part of what we learn in the Phoenix project, actually, is how to throttle change in order to have a conversation about, actually, if we could just do a little bit less change and look at that test and automate that test, and it will probably take us 3 weeks to automate it, but it takes us 2 weeks to run the test at the moment, and once we've automated it, it might take an hour, in which case, in the future, we'll be able to run X many more tests in the same amount of time. And that's a very kind of DevOpsy argument. In DevOps, we're often not talking about productivity savings, we're talking about the injection of capacity into systems, and that's our primary reason for automation, is allowing us to put more throughput through. Second reason, building stability in. So let's just talk a little bit more about experimentation and its relationship with failure. In DevOps, we actually rather love failure. For us, it has a very close relationship to learning. I mentioned lean in the context of value stream mapping. In Toyota, they also had something called the and-on chord. Has anybody heard of the and-on chord? So lean comes out of Toyota, comes out of the Japanese manufacturing industry, and we've kind of applied the manufacturing pipeline principles to IT. The and-on chord says, if you're in a manufacturing pipeline and there is a problem in your part of the pipeline, you pull the and-on cord and the whole line stops. It's kind of like breaking a build if a test fails. But the first thing that happens when you pull the and-on cord is that a manager comes over and thanks you for providing a learning opportunity. So this is a very DevOps thing, to kind of embrace failure as a signifier that we're innovating. We can also make some links here in terms of the cultural perspective of DevOps. I'm sure you all know that DevOps is a kind of combination of a culture and an automation movement. I mentioned the CAMS acronym a minute ago. Anybody heard of the CAMS acronym? So John Willis, one of the progenitors, was at the first DevOps days, coined CAMS as a way of us explaining quickly, like a framework. I often call it an elevator acronym, kind of like an elevator pitch. So if you get stuck in a lift with the CEO for 30 seconds, the kind of legend goes, you need to have something to explain very quickly what something is about. CAMS stands for Culture, Automation, Measurement and Sharing. Jez Humble, mentioned as the author of Continuous Delivery, or one of the authors of Continuous Delivery, and one of the authors of DevOps Handbook, also put an L in there. So you might often see it written down as CAMS rather than CAMS. I mentioned that because I was trying to get to this point about culture and its relationship to failure. So one of the things that kind of traditional organisational structures have when we've got a lot of command and control is cultures that are often driven by fear, and where blame happens a lot, and where people are punished, and where messengers are shot. And those are all things in DevOps that we want to get away from. So those of you working in Agile teams will probably be familiar with principles that if something goes wrong, it's not an individual's fault, but the team swarms together to figure out what the learning is from it, and the blame is not taken by one person. So we're trying to avoid blame cultures, and we're trying to treat mistakes and failures as learning opportunities. We want courage when we are doing DevOps. We want people to be courageous and not kind of crippled by fear, because we need them to be able to innovate, because the market is digitised, there's lots of competition, there's lots of disruption, we have to keep up. So we like experiments a lot, and experiments give us this kind of this loop we've got here. So we innovate, to innovate we do experiments, they're going to success fail, all of that is learning and allows us to move ahead. So some of the things we also like in DevOps is this concept of engineering quality in. So as I heard one of the questions come up at the end of the last talk, which was actually slightly a bit more about performance. So it's actually about NFRs, or non-functional requirements from ops. And it was, when do we do this stuff? When do we do the tests around performance? When do we do the tests around security? And the answer is, in DevOps, as early as we possibly can. So we want to engineer quality in, we want to engineer performance in, we want to engineer security in, all of these things. So that's missing some quite important parts to it on the screen. So I'm just going to see if I can get that to come up for you. Let's have another go. No, it still doesn't like it. Interestingly, you could, oh, maybe I should just wait a second.
Projector on the screen, it looks direction.
Unfortunately, only you can see that in the room, I think, which is going to cause, this is the big slide of the talk as well, so it's kind of key that we get this one up and running. Let's just give it a go, and I'll just be a little bit more patient this time. What I've done is I've broken down the, it's not, let me just recolour 3 of the blocks and see if that has a change. So just bear with me. So what I've done is I've broken down the DevOps loop. So the DevOps loop we talked about earlier, and it has the 5 parts of ideation, integration, validation, operation, and realization. So the arrows at the top are outlining them. And then what I've done, and you'll see this in a minute, is I've taken the I've looked at the product backlog and what we do with that, and then I've looked at what we do in pre-production. That's looking a little bit better, so let's get that up and running. And looked at what we do in pre-prod and what we do in prod, and kind of aligned these kind of DevOps development and delivery principles to it. And then at the bottom, I've got this big arrow that says shift left. And that's what I was just saying about building performance, quality, and security in. Everything we're doing there is about shifting left. It's not waiting for code to be delivered and deployed to do a penetration test. It's not waiting after a sprint for a UAT phase to go. And we've got customers that have 3-week sprints because they've got a 2-week development sprint and then they've got a week for UAT. That's not really how we want to do Agile. We need the business people involved in there more. We'll come back to that in a moment. So my first thoughts about kind of bringing all this DevOps stuff together is we want a product backlog. We don't want Word documents of many pages describing requirements. We want a product backlog that is visible to the people that need to see it and the people that need to refine it. And it needs to be continually, sorry to use the continually word, refined. We need user stories in there, and getting back to hypothesis-driven development, those kind of need to be written as experiments. So if we write something as an experiment, I usually use the if I do this, then I believe this will happen. Some people say, we believe this, and by this time we should be able to see this. But it's basically like a bet. You're saying, we think this is going to happen. So instead of just writing like what a user story looks like and building it, you're actually thinking quite often from a business perspective. So there's a link in the presentation to Hacker Girl or Hacker Chick's blog where she talks about this and how to use it to help you experiment with the business on what is actually going to work for your users, so making better business bets. And that kind of leads us to the next statement, which is most organisations we work with are kind of just starting on Agile journeys, they're experimenting with product backlogs, and they haven't written things like value statements into their user stories before. This becomes really key later when we want to complete the loop and say, that thing we did that we thought was going to be worth 10 grand, we've released it and actually we've suddenly made 100, or actually nobody's done anything with it, it wasn't very popular, so we need to kind of get rid of that and try something else. Experiments. Test-driven development. Write the test before you write the code. So you've got your user story, write a test for it, test it on the system, it'll fail because you haven't written the code yet, write the code, test it again and tweak it as you move forward. Great way of building quality in, quite advanced for lots of people. Next one, including the non-functional requirements from ops. So I kind of mentioned this already. This is about building quality, performance and security in. Again, lots of people kind of let that come later. Why do they do that? Because organisationally, dev and ops are often separated. Dev do their thing, then it gets chucked to ops, ops do their thing, and then it's released. That's where a lot of the pain comes from. So ops complaining that they've been given some code to release, but the instructions were bad. Dev complaining that ops didn't follow the instructions, the thing went bad, everyone has a horrible weekend trying to fix what went wrong. How do we fix that? How do we get the NFRs from ops in early? Well, it kind of depends on what your organisational model looks like. So we do quite a lot of work on a target operating model for DevOps, which kind of doesn't include dev and ops anymore. What we look at is if you move to Agile, you're looking at product-centric teams. So once you've done that in a kind of developer sense and you've got your ops team separate, what do you do with them? Do you teach them Agile? Do you teach them how to deliver services in an Agile manner? Do you assign ops liaisons to each of your product teams? Do you put your ops people permanently in your development teams. It really depends on what you've got now. So we did, again, another survey quite a few years ago now, trying to establish if there was any kind of standardised ratio between the amount of dev people and the amount of ops people in organisations. And the answer was absolutely not. There's a huge variation. That's because lots of people outsource bits. They'll outsource testing, they'll outsource dev, they'll buy products off the shelf. So there's a huge variation from lots of dev to very little dev to lots of ops, and vice versa. So it really depends on kind of what you've got. There's an additional problem actually with doing that with ops people, in that sometimes ops people have very, very niche capabilities. So you might be like an expert storage person or an expert networking working person or expert security. And then if we align you to one particular dev team, you've only got that very narrow bit of experience. So then we end up having conversations about T-shaped people and pie-shaped people and cone-shaped people, things like that. The next note on here is the business tightly engaged. So this is one of the common Agile fails that we see, and in fact one of the reasons that we developed the Phoenix Project game is the business says, yeah, we love the idea of Agile, you're going to give me so much more change, that sounds fabulous, and then they kind of wander off because they're a bit busy doing their thing. So they don't come back for the daily stand-ups, they don't come back for the sprint reviews, and they kind of treat it like a waterfall project, although they're expecting you to deliver in an Agile manner. If we're thinking back to the second way about getting those feedback loops, we need the business to be in that product owner role. We see a lot of organisations that do what we call product owner by proxy. So they use business analysts and such like. There's anything wrong with business analysts, and we need them in the Agile process, but they shouldn't be in the product owner role. Getting the business more involved in what we're doing is critical. How many of you would say that you work for a technology company? And would that same company have said they were a technology company 5 years ago? Hands up if the answer is yes. So they've always been a technology company. They're not an insurance company that's recognised digital importance. I don't know, there's quite a few of you to kind of like pick on someone, so I won't do that for the moment. We work, for example, with Hiscox, who are a UK insurer. They've got about 2,000 people federated across a number of locations around the world. Robert Hiscox, the founder, stood up a few years ago and said we are a technology company. Most people would think of them as insurance, but their main business now is data and the way that they manage it. So they have said we're a technology company. Target stood up and said we're a technology company. Lots of people would think of them as a retailer. When we realise as organisations the critical importance of what our IT team does and what IT brings to our business, we then describe ourselves as a technology company. So IT no longer becomes an order taker. IT becomes a strategic driver. We might also see a blurring between business and IT when this happens. So there was a great talk from John Fletcher, the CTO at Hiscox, at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in June in London, which is online on YouTube. Where he talked about the future where that DevOps target operating model may not only include a blurring between DevOps, but a blurring between the business and IT. So I started calling it BizIT a little bit, or BizIT. So there's recognition that in the future we may not have separate IT departments. We've come a long way since we run a little bit of back office MRP. We're now driving businesses forward in terms of innovation and capability. And then finally around the product backlog, we've got the work is self-organised. So this autonomy. So in a lot of businesses or traditional businesses, there's kind of command and control. You tell people what to do, they do it. I've got some large banks that we work with that are unhappy sometimes that they feel that they're a bit treated like robots. There's lots of talent in the room and they're just told what to do. They don't have this autonomy to choose the work that they're going to do and how to do it. Then in the middle, if we think about what happens in pre-production, so the first note here I've made is about a production equivalent test environment, which is something a lot of our customers really struggle with. They struggle with either getting operations to spend the time on building it or getting the funding from the business to build the thing. They can be very expensive if you've got lots of integrations. But we need that because if we're not testing in a production-like test environment, there are all sorts of things obviously that could go wrong we didn't know about. We need code commits daily or more. Mickey in the session before was saying that actually he commits multiple times a day. If you do it little and often, this is a key underpinning principle of both Agile and DevOps. Little and often. We do things little and often, we reduce risk and we're getting frequent feedback loops. Automated tests. So not just UAT, not just unit tests and integration, but also things like UAT. we want security and performance engineered in. So what I mean by that is with security, we don't want to deploy an application, run a penetration test 6 months later or even a week later. What we want to do is have a developer informed if they are taking a binary out of a repository that has a vulnerability and advised that it might be better to use a newer version of structs or a different version and be given the link to where to go and find that component that they're about to use. We want performance engineered in. So a lot of people think, right, performance is an ops issue. We've got monitoring on our production environments. That's all good. You can do monitoring testing and performance testing in pre-production, and some of our customers, like Hiscox again, do. Every single day, Hiscox spin up 50 to 100 VMs, just VMs at the moment, not containers, in their Azure cloud, and every single one of them has got their preferred APM solution, Dynatrace, on it. So they are testing performance in every application in pre-production. This word again, experimental. So at this point we want lots of experiments going on as well. We want to be thinking about things like minimum viable product. What is the minimum thing that we can give somebody that is going to show some value and we can get a response or a feedback loop from them, or whether that did show any value or not, to make a decision on what else to invest in. Fast feedback loops, I've talked about a bit already. And then this idea of the DevOps pipeline. So I've put this here because we haven't talked that much about automation, but at this point, this is a big link between Dev and Ops. So we've got continuous integration, we've got our daily plus code commits, we've got continuous delivery, we're testing all of that to make sure that the software is always in a releasable state. We might even have continuous deployment if we're that confident that our tests are right and we don't need a human to push that button. We might even be allowing things to go into production. Another quick poll, who's doing continuous deployment? At that definition, so a handful of people, not for everybody. Some of our customers actually legally can't. They have regulations and stuff that prevent them from doing so. But the DevOps pipeline, if we go back to that DevOps loop, some of the things that we're talking about is like most people when they think about DevOps automation, we're thinking about CI and CD, but we can think beyond that as well. So we can think about things like the validation of value statements, for example. So using an APM tool to check whether our value statement from our user story is accurate. So, for example, I'm going to use Hiscox as an example again. Hiscox have put Amazon Echoes in their marketing people's office, so the marketing person can walk in and query Alexa on the conversion rate of policy commitments on their website. So they are using artificial intelligence data from their, so AI to the business at the top, they're using artificial intelligence data from their APM solution to validate business statements that have been made and help them make business decisions moving forward. We can also use things like feature toggles, so we can use feature toggles to switch broken bits off in something if we want to deploy it and then fix it and then turn the toggle on when it's fixed, or we can use them to drive things like A/B testing, traditionally a marketing thing, but allowing us again to say, you know, here's a blue button, here's a green button, which one do people seem to like best, and then move things forward like that. A bit different from canary testing that I haven't put up here, but canary testing, so it's a story I keep on thinking of this. We ran a game recently and a bank who I actually bank with in the UK came along to the game, and I chatted to them afterwards, and they'd recently launched a new app because they had been part of another bank and their app's infrastructure had belonged to the other bank, so they were kind of legally and regulatory bound to release a new app. When they released it to everybody, and they sent everybody an email saying it was released. So the first time I went to the app, it was broken, I couldn't log in, and I gave it a 1-star review on the App Store. And about 3 weeks later, I kind of realised I was going to be having to use this app at some point, so I went back and it was better. And they realised that they didn't have to do that. They didn't need to release it to everybody, and it was the sheer volume that broke it. So all they had to do, and actually they could have avoided in effect doing a canary test. They could have deployed it to everyone, but just emailed a subset, which would have had a similar effect to a canary test, whilst not quite doing the same. The canary test comes from the idea, by the way, that we have we used to take little canaries, little cute little yellow birds, down into the mines, and if they died, we knew there was a toxic gas. So it's this kind of same idea that we've got like a little miniature set of stuff that we're going to test whether something works or not. Blue-green environments, so very popular solution for people that are thinking about production, like test environments. So in this scenario, you have two environments that are the same. One is your live environment, and the other one you're using as test environment. When you're confident that the other one is working and the tests are all happy and it's stable, you simply switch the router. and they switch round. So the one that you were using as live now becomes your test environment, and you switch on all your new features over there. Very effective way, as I say, for if you're trying to get out of a legacy scenario where it's very difficult to build a production-like test environment. There's lots of advantages to it. Another one, if we think about that DevOps loop and the relationship at the top of the loop between operations and development. So a lot of the time we think about the link between development and operations as in like development going, here's some code, ops, can you deal with it? There's another relationship though, because you've all got support desks, and as brilliant as I'm sure you all are as developers, sometimes defects do happen and the support desk will often pick them up, and sometimes they'll require a code change. And at that point, you might have two different systems. You've probably got something like Snow or Jira Service Desk or Remedy or something as your service desk ticketing system, and then you've probably got something like Jira as your defect tracking, issue tracking, product backlog system. So it's kind of this question, like somebody's found something wrong with the website and they want to raise a ticket, but actually what you really want is a user story in your product backlog. So this is kind of how to make those links between those two systems. And then the other couple of bits that I put in the production box there are things like anti-fragility. So having the time to try and break your systems. So anybody in the room use Chaos Monkey? 2 hands, 3 hands. So a few people using Chaos Monkey. Again, a lot of the organisations we work with have been around for quite a while and have got systems that have been around for quite a while and carrying quite a lot of technical debt. So frankly, for them, keeping the damn thing up is as hard a job as they got. So breaking it on purpose seems like kind of the last thing that they want to do. So again, it's quite a high level of maturity to actually go, yeah, we've got some time, so let's just like test breaking this system and whether we can fix it well. Chaos Monkey came out of Netflix. They do it, it's scheduled. It's not like it randomly happens and everyone goes, oh, we didn't realise that was going to happen. They're like, right, let's get a few people on standby. We're going to run Chaos Monkey and see what happens. It's very like my father was a pilot and he would spend a lot of time in the simulator, and I would sometimes go, are you ever going to like do some flying? But actually it's very important that the pilots spend the time in the simulator. They're doing the same thing. They're learning about what happens when things go wrong and practicing dealing with it. Same as Chaos Monkey. I'm doing a webcast this afternoon actually on DevSecOps and whether it's a good thing or not. And one of the things that we'll be talking about there is a similar thing, but in terms of anti-fragility around security, actually spending some time to run hacking or try and hack and exploit your websites yourselves. Lots of you probably get third parties to do it as part of your penetration test. There's no reason why you can't try and break stuff yourselves as well if you've got the time. And then finally, back to this experiments question. So you'll notice that experiments actually appeared in each box. Experiments, just to remind you, part of the third way, continual experimentation and learning. Another agile fail that we see a lot, and just a general fail actually. Agile fail is that Scrum kind of says you should have a sprint review and a sprint retrospective. The sprint review is for looking at the burn down to see what you did in that sprint versus what you set out to do. The sprint retrospective is more about how did the sprint feel? Was it the right length of time? Did the Scrum Master have everything that they needed? Did we have the right number of story points? What impediments were just not able to get out of the way? So kind of much more of a kind of feel continuous improvement opportunity. Similarly, lots of people have war rooms. So the agile fail is a lot of people go, review, retrospective, they sound like the same thing, let's just merge it into one, and then they forget to do the retrospective bits. They never do the continuous improvement. They only ever do the, this is what we did in Scrum, this is what we did in Sprint moment. The other one is war rooms. So people have an outage, they swarm, they build up a war room, they fix the problem, they have a whole list of actions of things that they think they should do to stop that happening again, which go in a drawer and never get looked at again. And that happens a surprising amount in our experience. One of the suggestions from Jez Humble actually is to start thinking in an experiment way. Just it adds a bit of peril or almost like a bit of gamification into the process. So saying, if we do this, we think the output is that. And we're playing this game with a couple of our customers at the moment in terms of people that have gone through the DevOps Foundation course. We're getting them to all write an experiment, and then we're going to make them compete about whose experiments are successful. So just an example of ways you can gamify stuff to make it a bit more interesting. So I'll be interested to hear your thoughts at the end on that and how I've put that together. I was thinking like this DevOps, DevOps-driven development and deployment or delivery. It's like we've got TDD, we've got other things like that. It would be DDDD. It really doesn't roll off the tongue at all, does it? So then I was like, it could be D. DQ, but that's also a bit silly. And then I was like, if you do hypothesis-driven development, it's like, well, that sounds quite a lot like high definition. And then I was like, oh, that just sounds completely wrong. I'm not even going to say it out loud. Anyway, I promised you a bit from the DevOps handbook. So this is a quote that we use a lot when we're talking to people about maturity. It's got a couple of lines in green, actually, because I use it a lot in security presentations. But I'm just going to walk you through it, because it's quite a big, long statement. It's basically in two parts. One way to enable market-oriented outcomes is for operations to create a set of centralised platforms and tooling services that any dev team can use to become more productive. So that first part is suggesting that one of the things ops could do is build a shared service platform of your DevOps pipeline and provide it to a number of development teams. Lots of organisations we work with, the developers kind of get frustrated and they've got more time sometimes than ops people, which are often under-resourced, and they really need this. So we often see the dev teams being very proactive and spinning up some CI and some CD capabilities. Problem with that is it often sits just in one dev team, so we need to work harder in order to make that available to the other dev teams in an organisation. It's one of the reasons we often end up with that silo of a DevOps team. We have a particularly forward-thinking dev team that want to do more stuff around getting releases out there sooner and doing more automation. And then the second part really is just kind of a list of things that you should look for if you're thinking about how mature your DevOps pipeline might be. So, shared version control repository. Now, I always thought this was a bit of a given, and then, like, literally, I met 2 companies last week that weren't even using any version control, which surprised me enormously. I'm just going to do a quick poll. I'm hoping most hands go up. Who's using version control?
Who isn't?
Few. Well, I was very surprised last week to find 2 companies, and one of them a very significant global insurer that were not using version control. So, yeah, not everyone, it turned out. This one a bit rarer. Pre-blessed security libraries. Anybody got them? So this is a couple of views. So an example of this would be if you've got an artifact repository and your security people have had a look at it and said, right, these type of binaries, for example, these type of open source components are good for us to use. These ones are bad. These ones have vulnerabilities. These ones have license queries that we need to worry about. Deployment pipeline, so we talked a bit about that already. We've talked about code quality, the security scanning tools we touched on, and then finally deploying the applications into the known good environments, so knowing we've got those there, and then the production monitoring tools already sat on them. So just to finish off then, a couple of principles. Another course we've got recently that I did for the first time last week actually is the DevOps Test Engineering course, and we really kind of talked about this topic a lot, that testing is not one person's job, it's everyone's job. A lot of people have separate testing teams. What we really need to do is embed testers in a team and share testing capabilities and get developers doing things like writing tests up front, like we just described with TDD, is part of what we're trying to do in DevOps. So this idea that it's not one person's job, it's everyone's job. Again, we need to have lots of conversations with the business around this, because the business tends to think, particularly if you come from a waterfall environment, that testing is very expensive and doesn't offer much value. They often also are under the misapprehension that testing's always late. What they often forget is that the development actually overran first and pushed into the testing phase. So a big problem in the waterfall environment, getting us to understand how important testing is. But the closer we can integrate the development and testing piece, the easier all of those quality and value conversations become. Again, security, not one person's job, it's everyone's job. In most environments, people have a handful of security people. It's a very sought after niche skill that isn't shared very well within organisations. We often see CISOs or the Chief Information Security Officers reporting into the CEO rather than into the IT departments, causing greater siloisation. If you read the Phoenix Project, you'll see a chap called John in that, who's a CISO, who's a complete blocker. He says no to everything. He has a bit of a breakdown in the middle of the book and comes back and is actually quite significant to the way the Phoenix Project resolves himself. But I think I've definitely seen a couple of nodding in the room. People recognise that portrayal of a security person that is in their little ivory tower and won't be very collaborative, shall we say, about things. So we need to help those very limited security people, help them kind of release their knowledge and wisdom through an organisation by using tools like the way that I just described and by taking responsibility ourselves. And then finally, DevOps is not one person's job, so I was delighted to not see any people with DevOps in their job title, particularly in DevOps teams, which is a bit of an anti-pattern, creates another silo. It's everyone's job. So these DevOps principles need to work throughout everyone in the organisation and be adopted by everyone to be effective. So I've got about 10 minutes for questions. If anyone has a DevOpsy question or something that they think should be added to my DDD. Any comments, questions? That's a quiet audience you are. In that case, I think we're probably done. Thank you very much for your time.